IFS, internal family systems. I jumped into that therapy 2 years ago, and anybody who knows me or is around me knows that every Friday I'm in therapy from 10:30 to 12, and that's been a game changer for me. Internal family systems has completely changed my world in the last 2 years.
Hey, welcome to the Sober Strength podcast powered by Or Health. I'm your host, Jesse Karajet. That was a clip from Chris Herren. If you don't know who Chris Herren is, look him up. He's a former McDonald's All-American, D1 basketball star, NBA basketball player. But most, I think, relevant to this episode is a lifelong sufferer of mental health, first and foremost, substance abuse, secondly, and now dedicates his life to helping others recover and find happiness and presence in this fleeting life. So it's just a beautiful conversation. I felt so blessed that Chris said yes to joining the show. Before we get started with the episode, I would just absolutely love it and be so grateful. If you haven't already, please follow the show wherever you find us, whether that's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, you name it. If you're willing and have an extra second or two, if you could just leave a rating and review, it just goes such a long way to help grow the show so that people can find the help and motivation that they need. And of course, tell somebody. If you hear something that benefits you, it's probably going to help somebody else. So be really grateful if you would do that for us. So without further ado, welcome to the Sober Strength Show, the powerful Chris Herren. Let's go deep. All right, Chris, welcome to Sober Strength. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Look, your story has been so well documented by, the world's best journalists from places like ESPN, 30 for 30. There's just been so many good ways to kind of understand that story that I'm just going to dive right in for the benefit of my audience. I'm just going to encourage them to go, if you want to hear Chris's story, if you want to go deep and just kind of understand that story of redemption, I'll point to those resources. But for the benefit of my audience, I'd rather, with the 30 minutes that I have with you, just unpack what you've learned about mental health, what you've learned about addiction, what you know about where we stand today, societally, culturally, especially what's happening with our youth. So with that said, the first question that I would ask you, Chris, is around this phrase that I've heard you say, and I just want to have you unpack it, but it's how we all do addiction and mental health and recovery a disservice by focusing on, quote, the first, not the worst. What do you mean by that?
It's actually the opposite, right? So I've been out on the road now for almost 15 years. And for the first 8 years of public speaking on this topic, it was always, the focus was my story. And I would go into auditoriums or gymnasiums and speak in front of children, high school kids, and their jaw would kind of drop. Once they learned, the life that I lived and what I went through. And there was just a moment in time where I was walking out of the school one day and I said, I put too much focus on the worst day and I'd forgotten the first day. I think when it comes to kids, right? Like if you talk to a kid about drug addiction, they're going to think of the lowest point in somebody's life. They don't understand the beginning. They don't understand the feeling behind the beginning, the why. And I say this to parents, like as a father of 3 children, when your kids get in trouble with substance use, primarily the focus is who were you with? Where'd you get it? How much did you do? When did you do it last? And it's not why. I think kids need to understand their own why. Once I pivoted and started talking about the beginning and not so much the ending, kids began to identify.
And with that said, having been able to interact with so many teens and so many people with all the initiatives you're involved with, what are some of the most common whys? Why people pick up, why they migrate towards substance use in the first place?
I say this when I speak to kids, like everybody thinks I'm here to talk about drugs and alcohol, but I'm here to talk about self-esteem. I'm here to talk about self-worth. I'm here to share my journey and the things that I went through and how my beginning felt. peer pressure is real and kids feel it. And unfortunately, in my opinion, I think we've surrendered to kids doing drugs and alcohol in their teenage years. I think most parents just kind of surrender to the fact that, kids will be kids and kids are going to go down that road. And unfortunately, to me, the scariest thing about addiction is nobody knows who's going to suffer. Nobody knows. When you're a 15-year-old boy out in the woods drinking with your buddies, you have no idea what's coming. And I meet parents every day that, send their loved ones to my center. And most of them would like a redo. Most of them would like to go back 5, 10, 15 years and parent differently and keep a closer eye on what was going on. So, when it comes to kids, I think if you can identify their why and they can think about their why and walk out of that auditorium, not only thinking about themselves, but their family and how everybody's impacted by it, I think we have a better chance at understanding it.
Yeah. And as you say that, I'm just to think out loud. I mean, I ask myself this question all the time. Like, what is it about me, or why was it that when I was a 14-year-old, the first time I had a sip of alcohol, in this case, it was a St. Paddy's Day party in New Jersey with my cousins and aunts and uncles. And there was something about that, ingesting something that helped kind of just change my headspace. Like, there was something about that was really appealing to me, and it stuck for decades, right? Whereas someone else might have that first beer and it really doesn't do anything for them. And when kudos to your point, but when I really try to unpack it and go deep, it's because there was a lot of noise in my head. There was insecurities, there was fear. There was so much going on where I felt like, alcohol aside, just taking anything to help me just kind of quiet the noise and just relax was always going to set me up to be an issue. And that's what I've learned.
I say that, that's what vodka did for me. I picked up vodka late in my experience. I started drinking vodka heavily in my 30s. Vodka just shut my noise off. Vodka, no drug helped me forget the way vodka helped me forget. And when I unpack it and I go back to those years, there's multiple reasons, right? There's multiple reasons. I mean, my parents are going through divorce. My dad's an alcoholic. I'm under an immense amount of pressure. I just didn't have the appropriate coping skills to walk through that jump.
Yeah. Hey, it's Jesse, and if you've been following this show, then you know I've had my fair share of struggles with alcohol over the years. You also know that I built a pretty solid toolkit to help maintain a healthy relationship with alcohol. Things like fitness, mindfulness, accountability groups, and technology. All great, all helpful, but there's one tool I've recently found that blew my mind, and I can't believe it took me so long to discover it. It's called naltrexone, an FDA-approved, science-backed, and affordable medication that helps reduce cravings and control drinking. The first time I took it, I'll never forget, I was skeptical and not completely buying into the idea that a medication can help me with drinking. But just after a few days, I could not believe how effective it was in eliminating all of my cravings for alcohol. It needs to be more better known. And that is where Or Health comes in. And I'm honored to have them as a sponsor of the show. You can have doctor-prescribed naltrexone shipped discreetly and directly to your door. No pharmacies, no doctor's offices, just the help you need. It's online, it's private, and it's judgment-free. And most importantly, it works. As of today, over 35,000 Or members have been treated, and 76% of respondents report drinking less in just 2 short weeks. So here's how to get started. Text STRENGTH to 710-710. That's STRENGTH to 710-710. You'll take a quick, discreet survey, and they'll guide you through the entire process of trying naltrexone for the first time. It's easy, straightforward, and honestly, might be the best move you make for yourself today. So if you're ready to take a massive step forward into controlling your alcohol intake, text STRENGTH to 710-710 and let Or Health help you redefine your relationship with alcohol.
I'm coming up on 17 years sober, and there's times I still want to change myself.
How so?
I think I'm wired to change myself. I think that's how I'm Like there's days I'm uncomfortable. There's days I'm uncomfortable. There's days I'm not at my best. And changing myself is the solution. Changing myself has been the solution since I was 13 years old. And it's one of the only solutions I ever knew. And I tell people all the time, like the toughest years of my recovery were 13 to 15. Year 13 to year 15 was by far the most challenging years in this
Why?
journey that I've been on for almost 17 years.
That'll surprise a lot of people, including myself. Why is that? What was happening, or what was different?
I just think, life it got fast. I travel quite a bit. I work really hard. I have this treatment center. I have a foundation. I had hip replacement surgery. There were just multiple things coming into my world. And I wasn't grounded enough. I wasn't centered enough. I wasn't engaged enough. The one thing I've always said to myself is like, you have to be part of it. Just because you speak and just because, you have all these things around recovery doesn't mean you're out in front of it. So I had to get back in the middle of it, but it was challenging. The reason I say that is because people need to hear that, right? Like just because
Amen.
you're 13, 15 years sober doesn't mean it's easy. And it got hard for me.
Yeah, I hear that. Thank you for being honest. That I'm going to be honest in return. So obviously you don't know me too much, but my story, and I'll keep it really high level to get to my point here. But I always say I had 2 seasons of really bad kind of drinking. And I was really surprised that the second season came because I thought it was behind me. The first season was, it sounds like similar to you. I had, dysfunction in the household. My dad died of AIDS when I was 19. I was just a wild kid. What can I say? I joined the Marines, and for the most part, I'd like to say that, I kind of moved in a good direction, but I would call that season just some combination of euphoria seeking, self-destruction, wild, just kind of, aimlessly and rudderlessly doing it. But the one that surprised me, and it sounds like you could relate with this, but in my late 30s, which was only a couple of years ago, a healthcare executive traveling the country, 3 young kids. I know you have 3 kids as well. And it just felt like I was so stretched thin and I was so uncomfortable because I knew that I wasn't showing up as best I could anywhere. And I turned to a familiar foe, but this time it was intentional and consciously because I was uncomfortable. It wasn't socializing. It was the first time I ever drank alone. It was the first time I would sneak into the garage. It was the first time I was not completely honest with my spouse. And I was just so surprised. And then when I endeavored to do this show, and I actually quit that job because I recognized I was heading down the wrong path, you would think, and sorry for the diatribe, but you would think that focusing on this show, focusing on mental health, surrounding myself with amazing guests like you that share their story, that I would feel completely protected and fortified. But once again, it was like the stress of trying to bring the show to life and the stress of not having the income that I used to have, it just bubbled right up again. And probably to your point, even though I'm showing up having these conversations, I wasn't engaged in community. I wasn't being honest with anybody about the kind of internal noise and stress. And I found myself having the worst cravings of my life to drink, which is just totally would surprise most people.
Yeah. I mean, for me, again, been there,
I could tell.
I've been there, and I, like you say it and I feel it and I know exactly, where you were with it. And it's hard to kind of unpack, right? Because like, here I am, I'm 13 years in, and like the first 13 were like easy, like I walked through those first 13 years. I was like, I got this. And then, it became challenging and it started doing what it wants to do. And it started isolating me, pulling me away further from the people I need to be around. And, by the grace of God, I'm still here. But I think people need to hear that recovery can be difficult. You can be tested, and I've been tested, but I know exactly the feeling that you were just sharing.
Yeah. So what did you do when those years popped up and you recognized, like, hey, I'm going to hit a rough patch here. It's pulling me back in. How'd you protect yourself? What'd you do?
I mean, if I'm being honest, right? Like I had like hip replacement surgery. So I probably put on almost 50 pounds, right? I got sad. I got isolated. I got depressed. I got tired. I got slow in life. In hindsight, looking at it, it became, food in a lot of ways. I'll never forget it. I was walking in to do a hip replacement surgery, and I got on a scale and I was 288 pounds. And, I just sat there in my room and was emotional, and I just wasn't in a good place. And I needed to get back to my core, to my roots, and put the work in. This last couple of years has been that for me. One of the main things that changed me was IFS, internal family systems. I jumped into that therapy 2 years ago. And anybody who knows me or is around me knows that every Friday, I'm in therapy from 10:30 to 12. And that's been a game changer for me. Internal family systems has completely changed my world in the last 2 years.
Can you say a little more about that? What is that, internal family systems?
Yeah, internal family systems, it was created by a man by the name of Richard Schwartz. It's a model. You identify parts of you that struggle and that you allow into your world. There's trauma in my life that I experienced, say at 12, at 16, at 20, that is unhealed, has not been recognized. So as crazy as it sounds, it's a little bit of time travel. You go back and you love that child, or you love that person. You speak to them how they needed to be spoken to. You're there to support them. And you kind of change the narrative a little bit. It's trippy, right? Like it's hard. Like you gotta be in it to really like wrap your hands around it. There were multiple parts of my life that were unaddressed, and I needed more. And I say this, and I don't say this in any disrespect, and some people get mad at me when I say it, but sobriety, it wasn't enough for me. Like I needed to do more work. There was work that needed to be done, and I needed to do it. Things changed. Like you say, 13 to 15, my children became adults. For the first 13 years, it was like, dad's sober. Dad's this sober guy. But then they became adults, and they were like, wait a second, dad, like you hurt me. There's some things in our life that I still carry with me. So we had to rewind as a family. And that's not an easy process, right? It's one thing to make an amends, but it's another thing to walk back there with them and experience what they experienced and go through the process that they had to go through and know that I was the cause.
Yeah. I'm just kind of picturing how you must have felt at that time, because, here you were, that's to celebrate, 12 years, 13 years. I mean, that's amazing. And congratulations, by the way. But as your kids age and grow older, for the first time, they're going to revisit, which is going to bring you back to probably some of those painful times in your life.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's probably an unexpected season of challenge.
Again, I didn't know it was coming.
Yeah.
Right. I really didn't. And I should have. I look back in hindsight and I'm like, how did I not know that this could possibly be in my world? Just ask, right? Like my therapist told me, just ask. And I ask my kids what they need from me, and I'll give it. It's just like for years, it was just, we're a sober family. Let's get through this. We'll celebrate this. And it's beautiful. But there was some things that had to be done, and we had to rewind, and we had to go back, and we're still in that process.
Yeah, that's so good. Back to this internal family systems, but just to kind of, call out something that, I think about all the time, but I think it's so healthy for all of us to even just be intentional and pull up for a second and just imagine ourselves as children, right? Because I have so much shame that I'm working through, so many regrets that I'm working through, that if I just kind of like quickly reflect on the past for any reason, I have negative emotions about myself. I judge myself. Like I just don't see myself as innocent or clean or, helpless, whatever. But, when I look at my oldest daughter's 7, all right, she's in first grade. When I look at my daughter and try to picture me as a 7-year-old, I just have compassion. I recognize that kid, for the most part, he's not gonna control the next 10 years. He's gonna feel out of control. He's gonna be reacting to his environment. And it just makes me compassionate towards myself. And I feel as though, I know you said Friday, 10:30 to 12, but if I'm intentional and carve out some time each week with someone to guide me through that process, I would probably find a lot of forgiveness there. And my life would feel a lot lighter, is what I would guess. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely lighter. Again, for me, I had to revisit times in my life where I was unhealed. I was still kind of wounded. And IFS, those parts it's so hard to explain. Like IFS, internal family systems, has given me space. It's given me space to see those parts of my life that were so close to me. Like they stick to you. The way I react to things. If something triggers me, it was so close that it was just all of a sudden on my chest. Now going through this process and doing the work that's necessary, they call them trailheads, right? Like I can see them coming. Like I see them coming. I know they're coming. Hot spots, trailheads. Like I'm aware of what that's going to look like if I allow that to get close to me. It's given me an immense amount of space in my life and where I can kind of sit with self and identify what I need. Everybody says, there's a part of me that wants to eat all those Oreos, right? Like I want to crush that. Part of me wants to eat the whole pizza. When it's simplified that way, like I have a lot of those parts. I have a lot of those parts in my life, and those parts have a voice. They have a place at the table, but they know their place. And when you allow them to sit at the table and have their voice, but keep space between them. I mean, for me personally, there's a freedom in that.
Yeah.
There's a freedom in knowing that part of me and not allowing that part of me to overcome me.
I love it. I'm kind of picturing, the old phrase, like, you can't see the forest through the trees, but we're just kind of in the trees, banging around, making messes, and just you got to pull up and see the whole forest,
And listen, there's some therapist out there right now saying like he's butchering IFS, right? I could care less.
Who cares?
Yeah, totally. Because it's a very personal journey, right? And I describe it as space. And for so many years, I didn't have that space in my life. Whether it was unresolved family issues, childhood trauma, whatever it was, they were so close to me. I didn't have time to say, it's okay, let me handle this. I didn't have time to say that. All of a sudden, boom, it's on me and we're going to go with it. And it's given me an opportunity to respect it, to see it, to know it's coming, but to say, I can handle this.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm gonna try to find a good resource to link to this in the episode description, because even just sitting here talking to you, I could tell it could help a lot of people, myself included. And by the way, you know the game when you have a 7, a 5, and a 2-year-old. I physically don't have any space, so I need physical space, and then I also need that emotional space. So, look, for some reason, when it comes to mental health and recovery from alcohol misuse, people don't talk about supplements enough. When I decided to step away from alcohol and rebuild my health, I quickly learned that nutrition and supplementation weren't just optional, they're essential. That's why I choose Momentous supplements. Look, for me, the goal has always been about health span, living better for longer. And when it comes to supplements for high performers, nobody does it like Momentous. Momentous invests heavily in NSF certification, meaning every batch of their products is tested for heavy metals, harmful additives, and label claim accuracy. You gotta know what you're putting in your body. And that's why Momentous is trusted by all 32 professional NFL teams and D1 collegiate sports team dietitians across the country. And look, Momentous doesn't offer every supplement under the sun. Other brands can do that just fine. Instead, Momentous nails the basics with bone-crushing consistency to help you build the perfect and intentional routine for you. And when we talk about basics, what are we talking about? What do I take? I take their protein and their creatine. Momentous protein is best in class for muscle repair and growth, while their CreaPure creatine, the purest form of creatine monohydrate, supports both physical strength and cognitive performance. These are foundational supplements that I continue to use to this day in my health journey for physical strength, mental fitness, and emotional resilience. So whether you're taking your first step or your next step in your fitness journey, these supplements are the building blocks of living better longer. Go to livemomentous.com and try it today at 20% off with code STRENGTH. That's livemomentous.com, 20% off with code STRENGTH, and start living on purpose today. There's something I want to ask you about towards the tail end of this conversation, just, practical tools, building a tool belt, a toolkit, if you will. I know that Alcoholics Anonymous played a huge role in your life, and you're a big proponent of Alcoholics Anonymous. But what I love about your work, through all the things you do, is you talk about things like mindfulness, you talk about sleep, you talk about movement. You're looking at that whole picture. Of course, having a therapist and doing the work and getting in community. But if you just kind of think of everything you've learned, and even maybe how you guide through some of the folks that you help through your organizations, but what is like a good toolkit that like everyone should be incorporating to stay healthy? Yes, abstinent from whatever their substance is, but what are some of those tools?
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, right, when I opened Herren Wellness, I made a commitment to myself and to the people that I was going to provide as much resources as possible for people entering the world of recovery, right? So I have an acupuncturist, a massage therapist, a breath work. We do yoga, meditation, personal training. It's all on the table here, right? Again, the thing is, we're having this conversation. I abandoned that for almost 2 years, right? Like as a man in long-term recovery, like I didn't have those things. And that's when I started to struggle, right? That's where my diet, my sleep, my connection, my community, my movement, my activity, I neglected all of it. And it was present to show me like, this is why you're struggling. Personally, 12 steps is my foundation. I love it. I am who I am today because of the Alcoholics Anonymous. I truly believe that. But I also know it's not for everybody. But I also fall heavily into prayer. The spiritual side of my life, it gives me great peace and comfort. It's just being consistent, working out, getting it done, committing to a plan, executing the plan, and doing what's necessary to stay sober.
Well said. Last question for you before I just kind of open it up, see if there's anything you want to point my audience towards. But I want to talk about youth today, where we stand. I mean, as a father of young kids, of course, I'm looking and watching the news and seeing what's going on. We all know the culprits, dangers, right? Like things like social media, technology, et cetera. But just your perspective, if you just reflect like where we are today, maybe where we were a decade ago, do you think that kids are getting better? Do you think that substance abuse and use is getting worse? Like, where do we stand as a country right now?
I would say we're trending towards getting better. Yeah, I do.
Why do you think that?
And I'll say that because of this the work that's been done over the last 2 decades around substance use and mental health. What I've noticed in the last year or two is curiosity. Kids are curious and they're not afraid to talk about it, and they're not afraid to ask questions. They're curious about gambling. They're curious about marijuana. They're curious about social media, where 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, they weren't asking those questions. So I think, we've done them a huge disservice with all of these things we put on their plate, from gaming to gambling, social media, marijuana, vaping, all of this stuff. Now, what I'm seeing is a little bit of curiosity, and that curiosity is telling me that kids they're questioning what are the benefits of this stuff, because they grew up in an era that this wasn't dangerous. Marijuana is good for you. Gaming is socialization. Gambling is part of our culture. But what I'm seeing now is at my center where I'm sitting, the average age that came through my center for the last 7 years is probably 34. 34 years old is the average age of entry. In the last 2 years, average age is probably 26.
Oh, wow. That's a big shift.
It's a big shift. And I think it's the curiosity, it's the education, it's people, and I say this all the time, like, I think we wait for rock bottom, and it's unnecessary.
Yeah.
I think, I knew I grew up in that world. When I talk about the worst day and not the first day, I grew up in the world that you almost had to lose everything in order to get better. And that shifted. Parents are pulling kids out of college early. Kids are coming here as teenagers. They're not afraid to open that door, that entry to recovery earlier. And that's the shift that I've seen. I think the cause of that is probably online gaming, gambling, and marijuana.
Yeah. Yeah. As I think about it too, I can't say that 2 of those 3 were prevalent when I was coming up. I graduated high school in 2003. I can't say that like gaming was an issue, and there wasn't like the online gambling access that you can have. You didn't have the access to pornography. You didn't have an access to a lot of those things. So yeah, well, that's encouraging and surprising as well.
Yeah. And again, I don't know where we're going. I can just say from taking a temperature of a room, they're a little more curious than they used to be. And I think that's that curiosity is giving them an opportunity to explore and learn. And I'm saying on not on the consequence, on the effects. I'm going to stay positive.
Yeah. Oh, glass half full. I like it. And if you're a parent listening too, going back to what Chris said earlier, just ask. If you want to see how your kid's doing, just ask the question, right?
Just as someone in recovery, my son is 25, and I walked into my therapist's office and I'm like, I had this beautiful amends I made last night to my son. And my therapist looked at me and he just like, did he want it? Did he need it? Like, did he want that from you? And I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, maybe you should have asked him if he wanted you to open up that door for him. And it just completely grounded me. And that's when he looked at me and said, just ask, buddy. Just ask that person you love. Like, is it okay if I share something? Is it okay if I make an amends? Because they might tell you they're not ready for it.
Yeah. And maybe it's about you as well. Like you want to make that amends and you're the one initiating, right? Yeah.
Selfish. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great, man. Hey, quick anecdote just on the lines of being encouraged, and then we'll wrap up here. But I'm a COO of a federally qualified health center up in Breckenridge. And we have these beautiful programs called school-based health centers where we put our, family medicine doctors, hygienists, and behavioral health counselors in the schools. And the first time I visited one of the schools, I wasn't expecting, I couldn't believe it. I walked into this big atrium, picture just like walking into like this big area where there's all corridors. And every single kid, there's probably 100 kids, high schoolers, just playing hacky sack, playing ping pong, doing all these things. And it stuck out to me. I went, oh shit, there's no phones. So I asked the person who was giving me a tour. This year, they implemented a policy. These kids show up, they put their phones in a bag, it gets zipped up, they can't open it. And it's literally forcing these kids to be social and to interact and just have conversations. And it was beautiful. So to me, it was emblematic of us as a in this case a state of Colorado, but hopefully a country just moving in a right direction away from some of the things that have plagued us of late. So
and that's why I touch on the curiosity. In IFS, there's 8 C's, and those C's, those 8 C's, you identify if you're there. If you have all 8 C's, you're in self. But the C that stands out to me in this process is curiosity. When I'm curious, I feel present. When I'm curious, I feel healthier. I'm not closed off. But seeing the kids over the last 6 months get curious and ask questions has been very rewarding for me.
Yeah, no, it's encouraging. So looking forward, what are you excited about in the future? I know you said you got 15 years coming up. Is that what you said?
What's your 17?
17. Oh, I'm sorry. What's the date, Chris? We'll be saying prayers for you. What's the date?
And August 1st, 2008.
All right.
And again, there's a part of me, right, that thinks we put too much emphasis on time. I think as a community, I think sometimes we put too much emphasis on recovery time, because I've had phenomenal days a year sober and I've had horrible days 15 years sober. So the emphasis again is just keeping it simple and just it's today, brother.
Love it. I love it. Where would you direct my audience to find and learn more from you? And what are you excited about in 2025 and beyond?
So I'm easy to find, right? I mean, we have a foundation called the Herren Project. We have my treatment center, Herren Wellness, and the public speaking. That company is Herren Talks. Listen, I have a front row seat to watch people get better. The gratitude I have. I'm at my treatment center right now, and outside here, there's 20 people who are living here, and they're at the very beginning, and I get to watch them go through the process and be part of that process with them. So 2025 is just is being part of and being of service and being witness.
I love it. Humble heart, keeping it simple day by day. No. I love it, Chris. Hey, thank you so much for joining the show. I really appreciate you, man.
I appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Chris Herren. Scroll down below wherever you find us, and there'll be some great links to his projects and resources, as well as the internal family systems that he spoke about. One more time, I'll ask, if you haven't already, please like, find, follow, share all the things and leave a review if you would for the show. And as I always do, I'd love to close out on a relevant motivational quote just to keep you grounded and strong until I'm here again next week. And that is from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German pastor, a theologian, anti-Nazi, and was tragically and famously put to death because of his advocacy for his cause. Just an amazing quote here for all of us to think about, which is, quote, "Nothing that we despise in another man is entirely absent from ourselves. We often expect from others more than we are willing to do ourselves." Now, here we go. This is key. We must learn to regard people less in light of what they do or omit to do, and more in the light of what they suffer. It speaks to compassion. Compassion for others, compassion for ourselves. As Chris mentioned in our episode, view yourself as that innocent little boy, little girl. Show yourself some grace, some graciousness, and some compassion, and move in a direction of forgiveness, healing, and freedom from shame. Thanks so much for joining the show. We'll see you next time. Live deep.